So thank you for that fantastic summary. I think you raised some really important questions, and I will try to respond to some of them because I think you've really covered a lot of very important material. One comment that you made, which I think is really worth emphasizing, and I think it relates to what brought faculty to the table in terms of being interested to do something with Harvard X, was that really the question is essentially, what do you want your students to learn in your specific topic, in your specific field? So one of the things we did with Harvard X is that we never went to any faculty and said, you've taught this course for years, we'd like to put your course online. We never phrased it like that. What we always said was, you have taught poetry or biochemistry. What is it that you really want your students to learn? And given the tools that we have, how can you reimagine how you teach online so that you can achieve more than perhaps you have achieved in the past? How can you reconceptualize your course? And not only did we ask that question, we then gave faculty access to the expertise in the Teaching and Learning Center and in Harvard X to think about media and pedagogy, how online might be used on campus, all of those elements, so that not only were faculty asked the question, they were then given access to expertise to begin to answer the question, ultimately. And that's what we think really engaged them and got them really interested, so that it wasn't just about, instead of teaching 30 students, you can now teach 30,000. Even though that's interesting and very important, it was, you really believe in your field, how can you teach it differently and how can you teach it better? That was a fundamental question that really got things started. And by continuing to stick with that question, I think it's what drives the continued interest and the connection with the Teaching and Learning Center. Another point that was raised was the consortium, right? How do we think about the consortium? In my view, the edX consortium, the fact that we have this remarkable group of institutions, all of whom are really committed to this higher order commitment to what online learning can do, not only for the world, but for their own students on campus, bringing that group together, I think, is an enormous opportunity in higher education. Have we taken advantage of it yet fully? No, but I think it's really up to us to take advantage of that. So now that we have more research data being developed, what we're already seeing is that Harvard and MIT are collaborating very closely on the MOOC research, so that the majority of the white papers that are being released, which I mentioned earlier, showing data, are joint Harvard and MIT. But now we need to expand that significantly and have more partnerships with Kyoto, with Delft, with all the other institutions in the consortium, and not only do it at the level of sharing research data in terms of what's happening in the MOOCs, but for example, Harvard has more than 18 blended courses on campus, which are also subject to research as well. So how can we start to share how we utilize the MOOC content on campus to really make a difference? And how can the implementation in different schools, in different parts of the world, really inform us as to what might be the best way to utilize the material as effectively as possible? That, I think, is one of the critical ways in which the consortium will be crucial. Not just the research on online learning, but the research on online learning transforming in-person learning. Because one of the fundamental principles of Harvard X from the beginning is that online does not replace in-person. Online transforms in-person. We have a fundamental commitment to the principle that ultimately the best learning experience in total will be a combination of online and in person. And if you can't come to Harvard, if you can't come to Kyoto, how can we imagine creating in-person opportunities that will allow the online to be far more effective for you as well? So that we've always had a blended model in mind, both for ourselves and for the world as well. So if you remember when I talked about our collaborations with governments, with companies, with high schools, it's an expression of that commitment to blended. So that blended learning is not just for Harvard students, it's a model for example, how a government can use Kyoto X content, Harvard X content, MIT X content, and create a blended model, for example, through community centers, through companies, through retirement homes, through high school teacher development. How can you create that learning experience that leverages online and in person? And the more that the consortium perhaps experiments with this, and the more that we share it, the more I think opportunity for broad impact we will have, ultimately. I'm now thinking of all of the other things that were said. Sort of another crucial component as well is what happens with faculty development and with professional development, and the development of educational materials. Once again, since I think about things like a biologist and I think about things in terms of ecosystems, what we're seeing immediately is that we're changing the development kind of opportunity, not just for current faculty, but for future faculty, for graduate students. So we have launched a program for 2 years now called Harvard Horizons that basically allows graduate students to learn how to use media, how to think about instructional design, and how to think about educational research. Because I think the future is one in which not only will your academic publications be important, but when you're applying for jobs, being able to show and demonstrate, look at what I have developed in terms of educational learning content, being able to show that will be incredibly important. So we feel it's very important that our graduate students have access to this material. That's why every single Harvard X project has graduate students in history, in biology, in engineering, in literature, working with faculty on the material, so that when they go out on the job market, they can say, they just don't write, I taught in a section on Japanese literature. They can say, look at this online module that I helped build. Look at this tangible demonstration of my pedagogy. We feel that will be increasingly important. And in terms of other kinds of professional development opportunities, we have a particular role at Harvard X called the Project Development Lead. This is a PhD that also learns expertise in media, technology, and in instructional design. And what we're discovering is that those individuals, it's almost like a new species in the ecosystem. It's a new role in higher ed. And what we're discovering is that many PhDs are quite interested in spending 2 to 4 years in this world, building that experience. And then their opportunities afterwards as faculty, as people that work with publishers, as people that join startup companies, is much richer than I think anyone might have imagined. So we feel like we're giving birth to a new kind of a position that collaborates with faculty, that collaborates with graduate students to build compelling online learning kinds of experiences. And that we're creating almost like how for many fields we have a postdoctoral fellowship that lasts for 2 years, for 1 year, for 3 years. There's an opportunity now through Harvard X to have a similar kind of Harvard X fellowship that gives you remarkable experience that will be very important in the future. And it's a different kind of experience. It's not the kind of experience that you get from, for example, an instructional design master's degree, because as folks at Stanford and folks and here at Harvard have said, it's more PhD based with expertise in a particular field, and then you apply that to innovation in teaching and learning. So creating more opportunities like that, we think, is creating a professional development pathway that's new and quite different, and that many of our graduate students are incredibly excited about this. So the world is changing, and I think this is an opportunity for us to really be sort of part of the creation of what some of these new kinds of opportunities might be.
Thank you very much. Your comment on the professional development gives us the new information, this deepen our understanding. Professor Liu, if you don't mind, could you give us some comments on the report given by 3 other speakers? What was your impression and comments on the presentation by other speakers, or any comments on what Kyoto University and Osaka University is trying to do? If you have any advice to be given to these 2 universities, please.
So one thing that struck me is, and I'm very excited about it, is how both Kyoto and Osaka universities have really made a commitment to connecting not just teaching and learning and MOOC development, but also the technological support systems like the learning management system and the educational IT infrastructure that's so critical at any institution. It's something that we at Harvard are working very hard to do as well, because what we have realized is that there's an opportunity to build sort of an entirely coordinated system where the kinds of diagnostic sorts of analytics that we get on our MOOC learners, we can also apply those same kinds of analytics to our students on campus. So the way in which the learning management system that our students on campus use, how that connects even with our online learners, is something we're incredibly interested in. So for example, Harvard is now switching its learning management system from a customized system that we've had for more than 10 years that we built ourselves, to we're now using Canvas, which is a semi-open source learning management system. And every tool that we're building for use on the edX platform, we're building it to LTI standards so that it plugs in seamlessly into Canvas and vice versa. So that now, no matter what channel we use, all of the resources that we develop can be used from one to the other. What's critical as well is that for faculty development, the more comfortable our faculty become with the on-campus learning management system, the more it relates to what, for example, the MOOC or the module might use online, the more easy it will be for them to move from one to the other and back as well. So that what you're doing in terms of thinking strategically about how all of these components connect, I feel is incredibly important and speaks well to, I think, that future where you will be able to, for your faculty and for your students, allow them to plug into a coordinated learning environment that regardless of whether or not they're using iPads in the classroom, which I think is very important, or using your MOOC content, or sitting down with a faculty member in a classroom that's been redesigned, which I think clearly both Kyoto and Osaka is thinking about this very carefully. It's one environment, so that it's not online, it's on campus. It's a learning environment that the university supports for its learners. I think that's absolutely important and the right thing to do.
Thank you very much. Thank you for a very precious comment. Based on the comments we received, or based on the presentation given by other speakers, I wonder, are there any reply from Japanese speakers? Professor Iiyoshi, please. This is how this symposium is designed. And I want to say that I feel very much encouraged to listen to what Harvard University is trying to do. Its content and its perspectives are wonderful. Your perspectives are wonderful. And also at Kyoto University, we have Professor Minoh, our colleague, talked about how Kyoto University is trying to improve the infrastructure in order to offer better education support. And thinking about it is the interesting, but doing it more difficult, and you need collaboration. And Professor Takemura talked about Osaka University's efforts. They share the same concept. It's not about technology. It's not about education alone. It's more about linking the technology and education effectively. I'm very happy to listen to those presentations. I think I can make one or two comments. As I mentioned today, OCW is the war at the organizational level, but MOOC may start wars at individual faculty levels, producing some star faculties. And as Professor Liu mentioned toward the end of his presentations, it's not about individual war. I think it may be a war among groups. Science, technology, in the field of science and technology, research can be done only by groups. And you need to have a good team to do good researches. And the MOOC is so complex, and of course you need efforts more than individuals. Individual faculty asking a vendor to shoot a video and put it on the MOOC. No, it's more than that. The MOOC is very complex, and it comprises various aspects of education. The Professor Liu mentioned the graduate students must be engaged or involved. And that support the faculty, and that also help graduate for their futures. Personally, I can think about the edX. You have more than 100 staff at edX. Postdoc staff, there are many of them, MIT and Harvard at MIT. Those with PhD are your staff. You may wonder why, with the PhD of MIT and Harvard, are happy to have jobs at edX. But as Professor Liu mentioned, this is the gateway to the future development. If you can say, I worked at edX for a year, then it's easier for the person to get the full-time faculty position. Or you may be given an evaluation that you are better for a faculty. Teach for America is one of the activities. If you participate in that activity, you tend to get a high evaluation. It's about teaching at the high school, or this is an opportunity given to the university students. When they try to get a job, participating in that activity would help them a lot. So it's not about the MOOC itself. It's about the team-based efforts to improve and revolutionize education. Being engaged in that kind of team activity, I think, is quite important for the students and the faculty. We offer support to education. What is a role or to be done by center like us? It's more than shooting a video and the cutting, editing the films into a MOOC. It's more than that. It's about how to build a good team, how to support team so that the students and the faculty, both undergraduate and graduate, can develop their full potential. Only by doing that, we can say that we are actually improving and revolutionizing education. That's all. Thank you. Professor Minoh, please. Well, I'm happy that you gave a good comment or compliment to Kyoto University, but although we created good link, but there are so many things we have not done yet. Now that we have the support infrastructure, the next thing is to make people use the available capabilities. And in Japan, in Japanese universities, we need to offer better support to the faculty so that our capability will be actually utilized. And we have to think about effective way to support faculty, but who can offer support? And actually, the support should come from students. Graduate students should offer support to faculty. So we are preparing a cloud sourcing platform so that we can solicit the student for a part-time job available in this kind of system. We hope to contact as many students as possible. We want to involve as many students as possible because having an opportunity to work in that way would help students in future. Instead of getting a job at a convenience store, it's better for them to find a working opportunity in their own university, and they can contribute to the revolution of the education. Well, if I start to say that, well, the administration or the headquarters may not be happy because it's about finding jobs for students while they are working. So I think there are some the administrative barriers, but universities, in essence, in Japan, are made up of only faculty, students, and administrators. But in a U.S. university, you have a lot of professionals who offer professional support. Just like the case of Harvard University, professionals are ready to get together and support. But in a Japanese university, you have only faculty, students, and administrators. And the professors must conduct researches in addition to education, so there are no additional professional support. We need more professional support in order to realize dynamic changes. That means, as of today, we have to be thinking about how we can engage students. Otherwise, we cannot compete internationally. So here we need to think about the system to employ students on an hourly basis, 1 hour, 3 hours. This is what we hope to realize. I don't know whether we can do it or not. We are going to do our best.
それでは竹村
Professor Takemura, please. Well, everybody else has said already what I wanted to say, but Professor Minoh's activity is very informative to us, and we, Osaka, is introducing LMS, and I work as the Cyber Media Center and introduce the IT and want to make a system that offer access for anyone to do the system, access the system anywhere in the campus. But in terms of the IT technology, I mean, teachers can answer. I mean, we can answer to teachers' question how to use these IT technologies. But beyond this, what teaching can be created using this IT? We are not in the position to advise to faculty, and this really depends on their teachers. And so, but teachers need support in this area. Our students use this LMS, and students want to use LMS, so we hire them as teaching assistants. And upon request by teachers, we assign these students and help teachers about the assignments and the course production, and make some tests in some cases. And this teaching assistant system can be one good way for you to introduce. And the Osaka U has junior TA and senior TA and teaching fellows, 3 different grades. And through the experience, the students can go up to the teaching fellow and are able to teach the course or do some grading and scoring. And teaching fellow, this the admin will say that the hourly wage for teaching fellows should not exceed the lecturers, etc., and some complicated situation arises. But we have to gradually and little by little change the system.
Professor Lu, that is, well, so you mentioned that you already have more than 60 MOOC courses online and also creating more, 64 something currently. But if these courses are provided spontaneously from faculty, you have that there exists overwhelming request from faculty side. But when we look at the case of the Osaka University or the Kyoto University, not so many faculties are positive about providing MOOC courses. They rather seems to be reluctant. And the one reason is that I think that usually faculties are evaluated by their research. so that how they teach or how they are good at teaching is not so much a big factor when they are promoted. But how can the faculty in Harvard be so enthusiastic about teaching in your case? So do you have any reason?
So one thing we've seen is that for the past, I would say over the past decade, Harvard has experienced a major shift in terms of the importance of teaching on campus. There's no question that receiving tenure, being promoted to a professorship at Harvard is primarily based on your research. But over the last 10 years, I'd say, the leadership of the university has spoken increasingly to the importance of teaching. And in fact, I know, for example, that when a professor is going up, in terms of a promotion, there has to be a very clear argument in terms of what have they taught and how well have they taught it and where have they shown any kind of innovation in their teaching. So while it is true that an excellent teacher who is a poor researcher will never get tenure, it is true that the teaching component is increasingly discussed. And one thing I will say as well, and this I think was a critical part of the change in the culture, for the last 5 years especially, whenever a department requests a new position, whenever a department asks for resources to go after someone at another institution perhaps for appointment, the argument must be based on their research, the contribution they'll make to the world in terms of research, and why in terms of teaching this person is important. It is a required part of the argument now. And over time, as the leadership continues to ask, from the president to the various deans in different schools, faculty start to listen to that and start to realize that this is very important. So I think at Harvard, the leadership speaking to it repeatedly and consistently has been crucial, and the connection to resources, to the number of positions in a particular department has been very important.
はい、
Well, thank you very much. Now, yes, that should be the bottom line importance. Yes, please. Dr. Liu, I have a question to Dr. Liu. Now, your first comment was impressive to me. You're not going to ask faculty to let you film the course, but ask them to reimagine your course. Faculty reimaginable is wonderful, and their passion or the strength of imagination are probably the strongest driving force. But Harvard and also Kyoto, we have many passionate faculty, many of them. But, for example, the teachers having problem. They have to solve these problems. Like in their class, they may have problems. They want to solve the problems. They ask for the help for their problem solving in some cases. Or some teachers want some stimulation. They may want to venture to MOOC, or others may want to help other people. In case of Harvard, everyone, from the top management's innovation and reimagination, do all the faculties share the same mindset? Or what is the motive of faculty to develop courses for MOOC?
They come to you, I want my MOOC. And I think you mentioned in a private conversations, there is actually competition, strong sense of competition among Harvard faculty members. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So of course, faculty are as varied as the flowers of the field. So they come to MOOC development for a whole variety of different reasons. So it's not as if there's sort of one in particular. Of course, there are faculty where ego is important. In other words, they have a particular perspective in their field, and the same ego that drives publication and writing books, where you want to communicate your viewpoint, is the same drive that would want them to do a MOOC. But I think that's where not simply saying to them, take your course and we'll just place it online for you, it forces them to think, okay, I'm a climate scientist. What do I think is most important for the world to understand about climate change? That's very important to me. That's what I do my research on. I believe in this. And thus, part of that same inspiration that drives their scholarship drives them to want to communicate that more clearly in their teaching. So that in a way, it's about blurring the boundary in between your scholarship and why you're a scholar and why you think it's so important, to the communication of your scholarship, which is really what effective teaching is all about. So it blurs teaching and academic communication in ways that helps motivate faculty to want to do, some of these online efforts. What's also true is that, as I said, it varies a lot. For some faculty in particular fields, there's been this stereotype that MOOCs are for engineering, computer science, mathematics, and science, but we have faculty that feel that the humanities need to be represented. It's very important. So that's why, for example, so Harvard is particularly strong in the humanities in MOOCs, and so usually people are surprised to hear that humanists want to do it. It's because if you think about it, video, still imagery, digital imagery, the expression of what's called the digital humanities comes to a particular sharp focus in online learning. And so for many of our humanists, they've realized that this is an exciting new space for them to make the humanities more exciting, more accessible, and more relevant than ever before. So for example, one of our largest projects, of which you saw one little piece, with the scroll, with the medieval scroll, it's a cluster of more than 30 Harvard faculty, each of which is doing a short course or a module on a version of a book, be it the Gutenberg Bible, be it Chinese scrolls, be it medieval manuscripts. That will represent a very large cluster where students can choose what their interests are and thread together something. So, I'd spoken about modules. What I didn't mention is that we're not only doing modules, we're doing clusters of modules. So let's say as a student, you come to the book cluster, you take a survey, and your interests are in Asian scrolls. The system will in time map for you a series of modules focused on scrolls from the Middle Ages in Europe to China to Japan. And so there's an opportunity for the system. There was a talk about personalized education. That's exactly what this will actually allow. And so faculty are very interested in contributing their particular vision to a more personalized universe of learning objects that students can use.
でいいですか？はい。
Thank you very much. Now we would like to invite the questions from participants. Anybody with a question, please raise your question and speak in Japanese, because we have simultaneous interpreters. And please tell us to whom you are addressing your question. Please. Speak in English.
My name is Walid Yassin. I'm a graduate student from School of Medicine in Kyoto University. And so one of the things is that MOOCs are student-oriented. And so the student makes it happen. And so many students first, like you might have 2,000 students or 6,000 students at first, but not all of them stay throughout all the course, in which the purpose was not really achieved. So I was just wondering about that point, to increase the commitment of students to take the course by increasing incentive. So typically this is the certificate that you provide, and this is what I'm trying to tackle. So is there a movement by MOOC or edX community towards further authenticating or globalizing the value of the certificates given by these courses, or keeping online certificates as second-hand certificates, a protective mechanism to keep the students in class? Thank you.
So the issue of certificates is a very interesting one. Clearly, for almost anything a human being does, incentives are incredibly valuable. And whether or not you call them certificates or badges, some more discrete demonstration of mastery is something we think has a lot of potential in the future. So last week I was interviewed by The Economist, and they really kept asking, will there ever be a Harvard bachelor's degree that's entirely online, right? And my response is, well, first of all, no. But secondly, that's the wrong question. Because by focusing on bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, PhDs only, and whether or not they should be online, in my view, you're missing the major change. And the major change is this, in my view. In the past, you got a degree, maybe 2, maybe 3 if you loved school, like some people do. And that was it, right? And then, as the years went by, all you had were your 1 or your 2 or your 3 degrees, and maybe you had a resume or a CV that would list your jobs and what you did, and that was it. In that structure, you feast on learning when you're in school, and then you starve for the rest of your life. Lifelong learning in that old system was a luxury, where when you retired and you had time and hopefully enough money, maybe you would take some more courses. In my view, and in the view of many, the world is increasingly a knowledge economy. You don't just have one job in your life, you will have several. You don't just get ready for one thing, you will need to continue to get ready and evolve for the rest of your life. So my argument is degrees will always be valuable. The Kyoto degree, the Harvard degree will always be valuable because that represents a foundation documentation of not just the courses you took and not just what you learned, but who you met, how you matured, all the other things you did when you're a student at Kyoto or Harvard that made you who you are at that moment in time. But then what will come afterwards are certificates or badges, and that as you change over time, there will be value to documenting literally and validating the change in your interests, your skill sets, your knowledge base, how updated you are. We see this in the medical field already. You have your medical degree, and then in the US, you have CME, continuing medical education. That will become the norm for everyone. So that in my view, the certificates or badges, whatever you call them, will become increasingly important. And the major challenge is how do we make those meaningful? In 2 ways. How do we make them valid? That you are the person online that actually learned something. Validation, we have not solved that yet fully. But the even more fundamental question is how do we validate that you have learned something? How do we know that you have learned it? You know, when it comes to programming in Python, we can validate that you have learned how to program in Python. But how do we validate creative problem solving in business? How do we validate the ability to interpret literature or scientific data with rigor and creativity? That to me is an exciting challenge, and that's what we need to try to do. I'm confident we will solve it, and in the future, just having a resume or just having a listing on LinkedIn will not be enough. You will want really rigorous, validated certificates of your continued growth as a lifelong learner, and that will be very important. So I think you've just asked an incredibly important question, which is something we're very interested in. It's not about replacing degrees, it's about adding to degrees. To me, that's what's most important.
Then in that case, MOOC, usually the MOOC course is available on online alone. Then by completing a MOOC course, your capability, do you think that the MOOC completion can validate what the person has learned in the course and what kind of capability the person has acquired by finishing a particular course? Do you think that MOOC can show and validate that one as well?
So I think right now, there are a number of MOOCs in certain very skills-oriented areas or topics where you can get validation of mastery. Assuming it's the valid person, that your validated identity, you can validate a mastery. But I think that's still a relatively limited number of areas. And so as I said before, how we take that further, I think is going to be very interesting and a very exciting area. So let me give you one example from biology. Right now, any MOOC in biology at best can validate your memorization of facts, ultimately. When it comes to problem-solving skills, right, we have no automated way of validating that. So one thing we're working on as sort of what we call a pie-in-the-sky project is taking the principle of what's called case-based learning, where you set up a situation for someone, tell them what happened, and then ask them to interpret and reinterpret as you change sort of conditions. We're trying to come up with an online version of that, where ultimately, for example, in the medical field, you are presented with a case with a series of symptoms, a series of diagnostic data, and then you must interpret that creatively. That might be one way of actually validating problem-solving skills in an online setting. We don't have that yet, right? But we are very interested in exploring that. But right now, I would say, it's quite limited. We can validate at best memorization at this point. And memorization used to be what the vast majority of courses validated anyway on campus. But increasingly, we know that that's just the beginning. Having the facts, simple information transfer is just the beginning. And so the really exciting question is, can we take it further?
Well, it may be a crazy idea, and personally, I think this kind of a book will be interesting. But the receiver student utilize what he learned and start making money. This kind of a book will probably raise the completion rate. Why I think this way? Well, the connection between society and universities. or after completing the university, what skills necessary to join the society, I mean, is still being discussed because there is two different worlds, university and the society. But it's very important to get a society world pulled into the university worlds, because after graduating university and get a job in the society, you maybe said that you did a very good job, but you probably will not be commented that you have a very high communication skill. So we have some performance and there is an accomplishment, then the person is evaluated for the level of accomplishment. Then why don't we introduce these ways of assessment into the university? The Delft University had the MOOC on solar energy. That can be a very good hint for us. Now, we do have some group project. Then the project is successful, and the members are rewarded for something. I mean, if there is such a case and assessment, then this will be there may be an interesting idea. I may be too optimistic, but the university faculty only party assessing students will be boring, because the students and the people who will be able to serve in the society is capable of doing job in addition to getting a high grade at university. And working in the team and working on solo, you can do a very good job and be able to contribute highly to the society. And MOOC and online and also offline face-to-face communication will be very interesting, but I'll be able to serve to the society. Do you have any comments, Dr. Liu, for Dr. Iiyoshi's idea? Do you have any comment? Well, if no, anybody else? Yes, this person first. I am Nagashima from Hokkaido University. I have a question regarding MOOC production team. Today in Hokkaido University, well, from last year, we started an organization called Open Education Center, and the MOOC type open educational resources. And also the MOOC we are going to launch in edX this year are being produced. And faculty and student and instructional designer and video producers, video production specialists are involved as a teamwork. And I am a member of that, and I notice that the faculty and instruction designers negotiate and talk about the teaching approach, and also organize the flow of video production. And it's a hard work, lots of work. Japanese universities offering MOOC is still limited, but in the future, many other universities want to start offering MOOC, but the universities already experience these difficulties. They want to document or visualize the difficulties and efforts they've experienced already for the other people, other universities who want to start the MOOC universities. I'm sure that Kyoto and Osaka universities have these experiences already. You want to share with us as an experience as a senior. Well, we are still in the process of accumulating this know-how. We are not going to hide anything away. We are open for your visit anytime. After visiting Osaka universities, you may be happy feeling that Hokkaido University is more advanced. But anyway, know-how. What's difficult for Osaka is that we take a top-down approach. Out of these two approaches that I introduced earlier, the president decide which courses to open in the MOOC. And I convey this president's intention to the faculty, and faculty get upset that I'm too busy and I cannot cooperate with you on the MOOC, and I'm in trouble. Well, anyway, I am not experiencing a good model as Harvard is, but in this Cyber Media Center. We assigned the staff in charge of this MOOC production, and I communicated with this person specifically and gradually started to produce the MOOC. We are taking the top-down approach, and my assignment is to make MOOC, and simply asking faculty to produce MOOC is not good enough, and I have to say to the faculty that I will be glad to help you and sharing the good cases from the MOOCs around the world and help you to produce a good MOOC. And I have to be able to explain to the faculty and persuade to the faculty that there is a big trend in the rise of MOOC in the Osaka universities. I assume that our chancellor did not know about the MOOC 2 years ago. So the awareness of the MOOC have to be promoted first within Open University, Osaka University. Some faculties feel that the MOOC is the extension of the open course. It's completely different. We have to offer the learning materials, we have to offer course, and faculty have to fully understand what MOOC is before starting the actual course. We have many ways to produce a MOOC course. We can learn from edX or Khan Academic School or other lectures, Coursera and others. We can learn from the clips of the out-of-campus lecture that Dr. Liu introduced earlier at Harvard Universities. But we have to make sure that the video taping film quality have to be very high. Make sure that the voice of the lecturers and speakers be clearly recorded, because we cannot ask the teacher to repeat once again. That's my advice.
So there's no question that it takes an enormous amount of effort. And every single faculty member that has ever done anything for Harvard X, 100% say, this was so much more work than I expected. So much more. Even though we warn them and we tell, and they talk to each other, they still don't imagine how much work it is. But so far, 100% of them say it was worth it and I would do it again. There was one faculty member actually 3 weeks ago that said something to me that was quite amusing. She worked on a MOOC on biochemistry. And she said, as they all do, this was so much more work than I realized. And you warned me, Rob, that this would be more work than I expected. But what you didn't warn me is that not only was there the work to create the online course, but then there was the work to flip the class with the material. So that, there's what you do online and then there's what you do in person. So it is really an enormous amount of work. And so I think that is a sort of a realization that faculty have to know. Universities have to realize that it's incredibly resource intensive as well. So for Harvard, it was an example of top-down in terms of resources and bottom-up in terms of faculty responding to the opportunity. Frankly, it's one of the only cases where I've seen top-down and bottom-up actually meet in the middle. So that's kind of exciting. But I do think one of the first things we did was to form a faculty committee immediately, so that the setting of the vision, the selection of what is important and what should go forward comes from faculty. So a committee of faculty. And that way, faculty feel like their peers are very much part of the process as well. And so for us, that was incredibly important.
We've produced only one MOOC, but how to position MOOC and produce. Like I introduced the cup noodle picture and the Campbell soup picture, but to put a template and to mass produce it, anyone can do this. And there are many tons of companies who produce video for your classes, but how to make it like kind of a handmade touch to the course. This scholarly discovery aspect is very important. Making this MOOC is an experiment for you as a faculty. I mean, of course, enormous efforts necessary. I mean, and as a supporter, simply advising that we should make this video from this angle, then you look cool. I mean, that of course is important to improve the quality of the video, but that's not enough, of course. You have to satisfy the faculty in producing the MOOC. This is not a technical work. So the graduate students probably know better the feeling of the teachers and faculty in producing MOOC, and so we should have a cooperation with them. And as we produce MOOC one after another, we can accumulate know-how on our supporting side as well. So each institution or university have to define the purpose of its own MOOC, and that will determine the approach you should take. If you want to produce a manual of a MOOC creation, of course you can, but I mean, document the experience in producing MOOC is very difficult.
Also, there's sort of a related issue that I've been asked a number of times by other institutions. Do we have to make MOOCs? Must we do this? Is this a requirement of being an institution of higher education? And I've been asked this in particular by, in the US, small colleges. So not universities, but strictly undergraduate institutions. And my answer has been no. You don't have to make MOOCs. You have to decide, though, what will you get out of doing it? So in other words, if you're large enough, and if you're a university like Osaka, like Kyoto, like Harvard, getting engaged with this is an opportunity for you to change how you do things on campus completely, and to be a player in terms of the movement of the field. But if you're a small college of 1,200 students and you don't have the budget, don't make MOOCs. What you should do is develop, because you could spend your money on other things. What you should do is develop your in-person pedagogy with other people's online content that is unique for what your school is doing. Ultimately, that is the most important thing. So that, and if you don't do that, well, I think you may have an issue, because you have to respond to the change. But it's not as if every single school, no matter of size, should be making their own MOOCs. That is simply not really cost effective, right? But what you should be thinking of, what everyone should be thinking about, in my view, is what your students are doing. Why should students at Osaka, Kyoto, and Harvard sit down with us in the classroom and learn anything? And if we can't answer the question with an argument for why that is valuable, we should be replaced. But I'm convinced we can answer that question.
Thank you very much. I think this is going to be the last question. Yamada from Osaka Institute of Technology. I've been doing the flip teaching, and concerning the flip teaching, people say in the classroom they do active learning. They feel they have to do the active learning. They have to do the group works if you are involved in the flip teaching. But is that true? In a flip teaching, or if you're using online video, if it's a blending between the classroom activities and the online activities, what you do in the classroom, does it have to be active learning? I am teaching life science. Every week, active learning, I have to think about the topics about active learning. It's impossible because it's 15 weeks because I didn't find 15 different topics. So I don't want to do active learning. It's a lot of work. Can I make it simpler in the classroom? I have 200 students. It's impossible to teach 200 every week doing the active learning. I wonder whether I can simplify the way I teach in the classrooms. To whom are you addressing your question? Professor Liu, if you can help me, please. I'm afraid we don't have time to ask all the speakers, so please, Professor Liu, could you respond to the question?
I'm actually glad you asked that question, because I think there's a misunderstanding about the flipped classroom and active learning. There are those in the world that say that lecturing is terrible and we should never lecture. In fact, I have colleagues that say that lecturing is the equivalent of medical malpractice, right? I do not agree with that. There are multiple modes of instruction, and active learning is not one mode of instruction. And what I always tell my colleagues is mix it up so that in a given session, you might lecture a little bit, then you have an activity, and then you lecture again, and then you have another activity. So it's not as if active learning is one set of approaches. My theory is that each individual approach has its own pluses and its own minuses. What is most important is the combination of them. So this is what's called multimodal education. That ultimately there's not a single mode of delivery. That what it is using different modes of teaching within one session. And that what happens is as students transit from one modality to another, that reignites their attention and allows them to refocus. And that for learning, that may be more important than the benefits or the drawbacks of any one approach. So I'm a life scientist as well. I teach a course of 500, and I do active learning at every session, but that's not all I do. Everything is an all group work and polling and all of that. I usually lecture for about a third of the time, but I break it up with a series of activities. I think with blended learning or the flipped classroom, what is more important, and actually if you go to the Harvard X site or the Bach Center site, we have a series of reports on a set of 6 courses that we evaluated for blended learning and what some of the pluses and minuses were, including what the problems were. What's more important is being clear in your mind. What do you do outside of the class and what do you do in the class, and how those two relate to each other. So that if you ask students to do things before class, make sure that what you do in class not only connects but builds on it. The easiest trap to fall into is to repeat what you had them do prior to class. Students hate that. They get very frustrated and it really affects their learning. So it's a matter of what's more important is not so much whether or not there's active learning in the class, it's how do you pick what they do in class and outside of class, and how do you make what they're doing in class as engaging as possible. And that might be group work, that might be case method, using case studies, it might be a particular mode of lecturing that you do. So I have a colleague that lectures most of the time, but the way he lectures is so remarkable because he never comes in with a plan. He reads the audience based on their questions and shifts the lecture. He says he has a Taoist method of lecturing. He follows the grain, if you will, when he lectures, and he's one of the most effective instructors in Chinese philosophy that we have at Harvard. So it's not one thing or another. It really depends on the instructor, on the subject, but you need to think about the complete arc very carefully, that's most important. So the flipped classroom is not one method. It's an approach to how you think about your class, ultimately.
はい、最後に本当に網羅するよ
Well, before concluding this program, Dr. Liu made the comprehensive and the summary comment. Now, just one last comment regarding today's symposium by all the panelists, starting from Professor Takemura, please. How Harvard considers MOOC was clearly described, and I understand that they take strategic approach and also find MOOC very valuable. And this kind of vision have to be shared by Japanese universities, especially Kyoto and Osaka universities, and we have to strive to achieve the target. Otherwise, we did a MOOC a little bit, and we are tired of it. We're not going to do this again. We're going to give up. I mean, we have to avoid this situation. We have to learn from our seniors and forerunners in Harvard University. And the Osaka University Teaching and Learning Support Center, we have an open workshop, and I invite you to participate, and you may be able to find some hint for your flipped classroom. Now, today, Professor Liu shared with us a very interesting experience and insight and perspective of Harvard University, and we have some vision, but I realize that we have to sophisticate our vision more. But I'm very happy to find out that Dr. Iiyoshi is a true partner for us. We can work in unity, and with Professor Iiyoshi's center and my center, we can collaborate in promoting this. And this is my biggest fruit that I get from today's program, that I know that he is my partner within Kyoto University. Well, I am bewildered. It's like praising each other within Kyoto-U, but I do echo Professor Minoh. The topic today is advancing higher education in the age of MOOC, and we are focusing on MOOC. It's very important and timely. How to best utilize MOOC is very important. And Professor Liu today said in his speech that this is a highly sophisticated thinking of eliminating M or O of the MOOC. I have an image of the slot machine, have 4 digital words, and like a Spock or MOOC, and it gives many alphabets. This kind of the flexible combination of diverse approach is I think it's interesting and important. And what to do, is like reimagine or to fundamentally review the curriculum of universities. So those might be necessary. Without this, jumping onto the MOOC is not good. This leadership of the university institution or from the president have to tell to the whole community in the university how teaching is important in addition to research, but at the same time the staff and the faculty and the students, each of us have to have the mindset of what we want to do, what we want to realize through this MOOC. And so to this, I very much appreciate your participation to today's program. So I hope that you will take this back with you, and in your position and affiliation, please think what you can do. And if the answer is MOOC, that's okay. If not, then remove M and have the closed course, or and try to open the door for the treasure box.
Say for me, it's been a real pleasure seeing how Kyoto and Osaka are really embracing and thinking deeply about the opportunities that MOOCs can really present for them, and not just the MOOCs, but the process of really developing them, of engaging faculty, and thinking about teaching and learning more broadly in the context of this kind of opportunity. All I can say is that MOOCs are just one expression of what is really a remarkable and historic opportunity in terms of how we think about teaching and learning, where ultimately education itself is becoming one of the largest and most important areas of endeavor, if you think in the world. So, for example, there's been some discussion, and I've heard this in many places, about the scale of the global education market, if you want to think about markets. I heard today that it may be larger than the automobile market globally. But what I do know is that Harvard, for the last few years, has been having a conference with Goldman Sachs. And at the conference last year, Goldman Sachs said that the global education market is larger than the global healthcare market at the moment. So when I said that we now live in a knowledge economy, in a knowledge world, I wasn't sort of exaggerating. So the role of teaching in institutions like Harvard, Kyoto, and Osaka will no longer be just frosting on the cake. It is a core, central part of what we do and the impact we can have on the world. So what we're talking about today is one reflection of that major change. Knowledge is the currency and the energy that drives progress in the world, without question. And so this is how we're going to engage that and lead in that much more effectively, because if Kyoto, Osaka, and Harvard doesn't do it, there are lots of companies out there that would be happy to do it. And I think we should do it.
はい、本当今日は4時間以上にわたって
For more than 4 years, we've had the symposium. Thank you very much for staying till the end of today's program. Professor Liu, thank you so much for giving us variety of comments as well as the keynote speech. And we learn a lot. We learn so much. We are encouraged so much from you, each of your words, as we think and innovate about the education in Japan. And your speech and comments encourage us a lot. Well, MOOC has been the theme of today's program. But as you said, the MOOC is just one form of representation. The university education, we have to think how to consider university education. I mean, you have a very flexible way of thinking. Each university has the different approach to the university education, and methodology can be diverse and can be multimodal, and each faculty for each student, they should have their own style of teaching and studying, which may be different from each other. We now have learned a very flexible way of thinking from Professor Liu. In Japan, Osaka University, Kyoto University, we will learn from each other, we will stimulate each other, and also hopefully cooperate with Harvard University in transforming or innovating university and higher education. Well, thank you very much. With a warm round of applause, we would like to conclude today's program.